Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Paul's Cinema Picks of the Week. And I am your gracious host, Paul Westbrook. Today we're going to be doing something special. You know how I usually like to talk about film and cinema? Well, here in my hands I have probably the most comprehensive film documentary on the history of Hollywood. It's called Moguls and Movie Stars, A History of Hollywood, and it was brought by the Turner Classic Movies. Turner Classic Movies came up with this DVD set which explains the beginnings of Hollywood movies from the very beginning till about, like, say, the 1960s, because they had to go on a budget. And it was really good. It was very informative. I remember I was just watching a little bit of this before my sister and I started to do the cinema chat and cinema picks, so we decided to watch a little bit of this. And the first part is called Peep Show Pioneers. It goes from 1889 to 1907, because everybody knows a lot of the movies were actually invented in the late 1800s, about 1893. And a lot of people credited Thomas Edison with inventing the motion picture. Well, he may have patented it as an American invention, but the thing is that movies are a lot older than that, and I like to credit the Europeans. And in this documentary, they actually credit the Europeans, Auguste and Louis Lumière, who were actually the French filmmakers, and they did some of the very first movies, including Workers Leaving the Lumière Factory, which was around 1893, I believe, or 94. And that is actually known as the very first exhibited motion picture in history. Yeah, so this documentary here, you get various chapters. You get the Peep Show Pioneers. You get the birth of Hollywood from 1907 to 1920, which during that period, you had the inception of stars like Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Laurel and Hardy, although they weren't a team until the late 1920s. Laurel and Hardy started off doing single movies, and Stan Laurel was actually a colleague of Charlie Chaplin's in the Fred Karno days, because they both came over from England. They were in the music hall shows, and they did a lot of stage comedy. And Charlie Chaplin came around 1911, 1912, and by 1913 he was discovered in the States doing these shows by Max Sennett and Mabel Normand, who went to one of his shows, and then they cast him in their Keystone comedies, the first being Making a Living. And the second one, I'm going to look through the book here at the same time, so follow along. So the first episode is Peep Show Pioneers, which I mentioned, and it goes into the Nickelodeon days. Nickelodeons were very early motion picture palaces, similar to what our theaters are like today. You'd pay a nickel, and then you'd go in and you'd see about a program of 20 films. Then you got the episode 2, The Birth of Hollywood, which is the birth of the motion picture stars, and like Charlie Chaplin, and like D.W. Griffith, and Fairbanks and Pickford. And then you have, in the third one, episode 3 is The Dream Merchants. Those are the Moguls, the people that actually made the money. And I was explaining to my friend Nick when they came in, I couldn't believe that Hollywood actually, for its time, was like a Jewish community. It was actually formed by Jewish merchants and people that had just come over, like immigrants. And one guy actually had $50 in his pocket. That was Carl Laemmle. He actually had $50 in his pocket when he came over, and he invented the Universal Studios around 1917 when it was officially opened in 1917. Okay, then after the Dream Merchants, you have, like, when they're talking about stars like Greta Garbo and Buster Keaton. And then episode 4, Brother Can You Spare a Dime, 1929. That is into the talkie era, when the talkies came in. The first one, known talkie, being The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson. And then you have, I'm just taking a look here. They talk about Gone with the Wind. Episode 5, The Warriors and the Peacemakers, which covers the period of 1941 to 1950. And you get the rise of Orson Welles, and you get some of the other contemporary stars of the time. Orson Welles was famous for Citizen Kane, which was the first commercially most expensive movie for its time. And Casablanca, starring Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains. And Olivia de Havilland. And of course, Gone with the Wind, which came out in 1939, which was a very magnificent film of its time. And episode 6, we go to episode 6 here, The Attack of the Small Screens. That's around the time, 1950, 1960, is when television came in. When television came in, the movies were actually in trouble because of the fact that, you know, you just paid for a TV, and then your TV was here at the home, so you got to see the show on TV, and then it threatened the business of the motion pictures, because motion pictures, of course, you have to pay a lot of money to go and see. So, why would people want to go and see the movies and have to pay all this money when they just sit at home and watch a show on the tube? So that's, it covers around that period as well. And you got Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, James Dean, and Sidney Poitier, who was a very, very well-known actor of his time. Marilyn Monroe. And then episode 7, which is the final episode, it's 1960 to 1969. And that covers the fall of the movie moguls, because around that time the movie moguls were losing power, because they used to control every aspect of your life. If you were contracted to a studio at that time, like the Universal, or you contracted to Fox or MGM, the movie mogul basically controlled your entire life. They controlled who you married, they controlled your life, they controlled going to a restaurant, what friends you could hang out with. And yeah, after a while, people got tired of the studio system. So then when the independents came in 1960 was really when the independents started really coming in, and you had Easy Rider. Then you realized that, hey, you know, movies had to change, and the studios had to change, and a lot of the moguls by that point were being ousted, like Jack Warner in 1969, around the time they did Camelot, and Louis B. Mayer, and I think 1956-57 was ousted out of power. And then a lot of independent filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas came in. You know, these were what you call the young mavericks. They would come in and they would actually make a different type of movie, because Hollywood was changing around that time, and that's what was going on. So, yeah, this here covers all of that. It's certainly the most recommended document of the history of cinema from its beginnings till about the 1960s, when the independents and the young rebels started coming in. But I would definitely recommend anybody that go out and buy this documentary, Moguls and Movie Stars. And you get Robert Osborne. He's in a series of panels afterward where he sits with the director and the maker of this documentary, and they're talking about the different chapters that they went through, and then the research that they went through to try and get this to be a really good documentary. Yeah, I would, if you want to look for something, look for this one. So, anyway, that's my look at Moguls and Movie Stars. And again, I want to thank you for listening, and I hope that you will like and subscribe to this video. I hope you will definitely leave comments, because I love to have comments. Whether they're good, whether they're critical, but hopefully nice. Like, I like to have something that's at least nice and know that people actually like watching the show. And until next time, this is Paul Westbrook saying, I'll be seeing you at the movies. Good night.